And so getting back to the specifics of this Colorado dynamic with the recent assault weapons ban attempt, obviously this went through the legislature. It got pared back.
No, ultimately it did not get pared back. It got what got introduced was the basically the same thing that had been leaked in January and then was introduced a number of weeks later. It was the full strength ban. It was not a possession ban. It was a sales and transfer ban.
Right.
But its scope never changed.
I thought they tried to pare it back at the end to like just a bump stock ban.
Well, so there's the story on that. So the legislator who sponsored it was a very ineffective legislator and not highly regarded within the Democratic caucus by some fellow Democrats. At the start of the all-day hearing, which began at 11:30 a.m. and wrapped up at 1 a.m. the next day, 9:30 to 1 a.m., had said when she was introducing the bill that she would be coming back that afternoon around 1 p.m. with something to cut it down to what she called a bump stock ban. But in fact, that she didn't get that done till much later in the night. And it was and it was, as usual, it was this bait and switch that the gun ban people try to pull on everything. And bump stocks is one of them. If you wanted to ban bump stocks, the Denver City Council did that, and they have a good definition of what a bump stock is. And you can't have one in Denver now. But they also ban anything that makes the trigger operate faster. Mm-hmm. So, what they're thinking of is one thing that they would tell you about would be things like a forced reset trigger or a binary trigger. Right. But in addition, it's written so broadly that if you buy a gun with a 6-pound trigger pull and you want to replace that with a spring, so you have a 5-pound trigger pull, that would be illegal. But anyway, when she introduced that language very late at night to the exhausted committee, they ended up voting it down.
Yeah, right. So it was introduced, it languished, it got to this hearing. It wasn't going to pass as this full assault weapons sales ban. They tried to move it to this sort of bump stock / really any trigger modification.
Any trigger improvement would be illegal.
And then that failed. And you're saying that this was mainly because the governor didn't want this legislation to go through. So it sounds like they ran into a political constraint in that Paulus perhaps not interested in this policy for a couple of reasons. One of them may be that he wants to be president someday, and this is maybe that is interesting because certainly Democrats have really embraced this policy increasingly over the last 5 to 10 years, and especially the last few years with President Biden taking perhaps the most aggressive approach to supporting assault. It's basically what he calls for every couple of weeks, right? So it's interesting to see the governor of Colorado backing away from that. But I want to also talk about, one of the things I'm wondering in this situation is, in addition to those political costs, political calculation at play in Colorado on this, is there a calculation that, hey, this law is not likely to stand up in court anyway, and so why go and pass one right now?
Oh, from the governor's point of view?
Just from like legislators and the governor's point of view, do you think that's part of the reason that it failed in Colorado?
I think more of the problem, at least for the votes in committee, was that the Democrats have a supermajority in the Colorado House. But one of the reasons they got that supermajority is they won a lot of races in places that in the past had not traditionally elected Democrats. And part of the ways they had campaigned was to say, I'm in favor of all the existing gun control laws in Colorado and maybe some additional ones, but I'm not going to ban guns. And so some of them had set up that kind of red line for themselves.
Okay. So it wasn't just the governor then. There's also other Democrats in the state house that were opposed to this policy as well.
And happily so, and especially when they didn't have to cross the governor to stick by that.
I see.
That made it all the easier. And adding on top of it, the absolute terribleness of the sponsor of the bill, who's a hardcore, narcissistic, extreme leftist who's spent a lot of time in the legislature trashing her fellow Democratic colleagues for not being as socialist as she is.